Now,
the one to the left of it is the Bronze Star. That was awarded for combat duty on the field of operations.
okay.
And it wasn't easily achieved. You had to be one of the guys who worked for it. And then, of course, I had my foreign medals there. The Italian Croce al Valor, the Polish thing was interesting because there was no more Poland at the time. Hitler was running Poland. And the Polish government had moved to London. So the President of Poland presented me with that medal, which is the cross swords, the Croce al Valor. I have most of my so-called fame because of having preserved the Leaning Tower of Pisa when I could have destroyed it. And
What do you mean by that?
One of the wonders of the world. I was sent to see, a radio man and myself were sent out because of my observation abilities. The general selected me. We were attacked in Pisa very badly. We were hit by a lot of artillery shells on the road. We couldn't quite get into the city. And 2 days, 3 days went by on the road to Pisa. We were about 1.5 miles from Pisa, where we were under the shell of the government, of the Germans. They had observation, we didn't. It happened to be that kind of a landscape. We didn't know exactly where all these shells were coming from, these artillery shells, rockets and everything else they threw at us. And I was sent out with my radio man to see if they were using the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which we could just barely see over the top of the tree line of that edifice, as to whether the Germans were using it for an observation post. They were not, churches were not allowed, and icons of the type of Pisa were not supposed to be used, but in all actuality, reality, they were. And whether the Germans used it or not, I'll never know. But for 4 hours, it was up to me to determine whether the Germans were in the tower. And being the artist that I was at the time, I was painting and sculpting and doing things of that nature. I kind of hated to destroy this gorgeous Leaning Tower. But had I seen a shiny button, anything there, the tower would be a pile of gravel today because the artillery was all ready to go, all ready to zero it in. All I had to do was say fire.
Ah, and is that the reason why the...
But didn't happen. Instead, I found myself suddenly the target of German artillery. Overhead bursts of black smoke, shrapnel raining down. And I rushed back, but for the first 10 or 15 minutes of rushing back, these bombardments kept on my tail with the radio man. And the two of us were running through the woods and fields on the way back to headquarters, and ultimately we lost them. And it's a very long story. What happened and what we said to each other and all along that terrible, interesting day that I returned to headquarters. Because first we had a radio back, and they said, "Get back, the generals have decided they're not going to destroy the tower, we're going to outflank it." And I was clear at that point to get the hell out of there.
Okay, so then my question is, you had Was it the mayor or the governor of Pisa, or was it not Pisa, but...
Well, at that time, the war wasn't over yet.
Okay.
It was a long way from the war being over. We lost about at least 40% of our men during the rest of the time we were in Italy.
Okay.
And it was much time later that to bring up your topic that you just said. The only time I discovered that they really appreciated me in Pisa was on a vacation trip I took in the year 2000, which is not too long ago, 13 and a half years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was invited to Pisa by the mayor and the city hall people to come and visit them, which I did, and they presented me with all kinds of gifts of that kind, which you don't see here. This is just a medal, but I had books and everything else that they had given me, little gold medals, and they have me on record as the sergeant that saved the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Let's talk about your 2 books. Why did you decide to write them?
I was in business until I was, let's say, 1994. I got tired of being in business, retired. Partially retired, partially kicked out by imports from overseas to get out of business. And I did that. And I'm trying to remember all the details for me that makes sense.
Whatever it was, it made sense to get out and do something different.
And to write the books you were asking. Now what happened was, one day my wife said, "Why don't you write your stories? They're so interesting." And I said, "Who the hell wants to hear about me, you know?" And she said, "No, start writing." Then he pushed me, and at just about the same time, my kids donated an old computer to me. And made it a little easy. I said, "Well, I'll try." I sat down and started to write, and out came Through My Eyes. It took about a year for me to put it together. And I found it kind of an interesting hobby. So I began to write at that point. The second book, that book was about my experiences in the war, which you could assimilate with most experiences, I think. So learning to hate and all that kind of thing when they go into battle. But the second book, I wrote it about 2 years ago. It took me 4 years to write. It had to do with my knowledge of my friendship with the Italian boy who I'd met, the partisan, and his friends and his groups while we were in the mountains of Italy, up in the Apennines. And I had all that information in my head, and I had visited their headquarters when I was on a trip. I think it was about the same time, about 2000. And I met with the partisans there. I didn't know if they were there or not, but I had my hotel, what do you call him, the guy that's in charge of the telephones and everything. Anyhow, he looked it up for me and said, "Yes, there's still a headquarters here." I didn't think they were still alive. So I went over there with my wife, and we met with them for a few hours, which is part of my book. And from then on, I began to get all kinds of information that they had in files, and other groups of partisans had in their files. And they would start piling into my mailbox, and I decided I better do a book about this. But most of it was in Italian. So I got a local Italian fellow who here happens to teach Italian at the senior center, Frank Fedeli. And between Frank and I, we put together this book.
Awesome.
It's a book that every Italian should have, because of the wonderful things their forefathers did. Their progenitors, progenitors, I should say, were sacrificially brave. They go out and did the craziest things to overcome the problems that were going on in Italy at the time. Not only with the Germans, but with the Italy's Mussolini's group of black shirts. And
what's a black shirt? I never heard that term.
That black shirt was the army.
Is that the
Mussolini's army?
Oh, Mussolini's army. Okay.
Shirts,
okay.
Dark uniforms. And
so were they like the SS, pretty much?
Yeah, there were spies all over the place, fascist spies.
Okay.
And these black shirt army men. And we came across them, we ignored them as much as we could, but the partisans could not ignore them. The partisans and the black shirts had a war, a constant war together, killing each other. That was their pleasure, and that's what they did.
Wow.
It was a killing time.
Yes, I can see that. Okay, so then after the war, and you got all your medals, and most of us don't know what the medals stand for. Tell us what the medal was. The Medal of Allegiance. What does it stand for?
Well, as you read the book here, it shows, it tells. I have to put my glasses on to read.
Are they still giving this medal out?
Yes.
They are. Okay. I didn't know if they're still doing it or they're not.
For exceptionally meritorious conduct on performance of outstanding service.
There you go. Okay. So.
And the Bronze Star, which is the next one. Where are you, Bronze Star? Some of the Bronze Star is just generally a combat kind of medal.
Okay. So then my question to you, after all of this, what can you tell the kids of today? Because there's a road we're heading down.
Kids of today is to first of all appreciate more than they have what their forefathers did in the war. That was the war, unlike Vietnam, unlike all the other wars since that time, that made sense. It was the only war. A crazy man was in charge of the world at the time, and that was Hitler. And that was it.
Tell me this, do you think that this could happen again?
Unfortunately, I can't guess at that, because there is always the chance
of a crazy man.
Idiots, whether it's our country or their country, whoever it is, such as the Muslims, the Jews, there's always a constant friction of terrible frictions that should not be there, but they are, and as long as they're there, anything can happen.
The rise right now of the anti-Semitic that's going on in Greece and unfortunately Italy and France and Germany and Sweden. To me it seems like it's starting all over again. It's even the rise in America. I'm seeing it even here. That bothers me.
Texas is going to leave.
What happened?
Texas is going to go the way of God knows what. But their education has to be better than it is. What they learn in schools must be better than it is. The teachers have to learn how to teach them better. Something has to happen to make them more educated of what they're doing and why they're doing it. and how to think properly, how to rationalize properly.
The scariest thing for me is that being in California, I'm seeing more anti-Semitic slurs in California than I've ever have. And I have friends who are here and they're hearing it, and they're 18, they're hearing it in their schools.
But you know I was Jewish.
Yes.
And part of my hate for Hitler was the cause of my being a crazy soldier. I had to show the rest of the Gentiles in my company's 200 men, that a Jew can do as well. And that's what I did.
Did they think that you couldn't do as well because you were...
Well, when I first joined up, when we arrived in Oregon to do our basic training, the welcoming committees were there, the usual dummies, I'd call them. You're just a black man, you'll turn inside out. You're just a nigger turned inside out, you Jews.
That's what they called you?
That's what they called us.
Okay. How did you feel about that?
I'll show you bastards.
Okay, put up or shut up, basically, is what you're saying. Okay, so this is where the madness came in for you in the war.
But there was kind of a quiet, as far as the blacks were concerned. The few that I met in Italy, I never knew them very closely.
Okay.
Not closely enough. We didn't have enough time. We were in the town for 2 days, and I would go to an opera, I would go to a concert, I would go with my friend, but we'd never really go to dances or anything.
Were the blacks there?
Yeah.
Were they dancing with the Italians, women, or were they just on the outside, or were they?
I don't remember seeing any, but there probably were.
Were they at the opera?
There was nobody that I knew of. The Southern boys in my outfit, and there were a lot of them, the ones that would be complaining, never mentioned the thing. There was not a subject during the war. It just wasn't a subject.
So they
were there with us, that's all.
Okay, so did the black soldiers fight side by side with the other soldiers, or did they just total separate troops, or what was it?
Separate troops. They are separate. They have their separate areas to cover. You got to take that hill. That's under your company. It's not anybody else's. So everything is itemized.
So if they get hurt, did they have like a black tent for black nurses to come help them, or was it?
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know.
Okay.
I never saw any. I was not involved with anything outside of a wisdom tooth removed for 300 days.
So then what happened when you came back to America?
They came back to America. Some people appreciated what we had done, and others had not. And I was angry when that came up. I often was ready to fight with people who didn't care what they said or did. But I knew that in time this whole thing would subside. And it did subside to a point. I don't know what point, but to a point.
So do you think it's rearing its ugly head now?
You're referring to what, the attitudes?
Mm-hmm.
Attitudes. Only in certain areas. Only in the South. I don't think any of the other states are. I've spent a lot of time traveling, and I've never found any problems. There may be, I think it's a generational thing, and I think within 100 years it'll be long gone, long gone.
If you had to say one thing about your experience to end this, what would you say? What would you say if you were speaking to your grandkids to leave them this message for the world to know? What would it be?
Learn to read the map. Learn to read the map. Get ahead.
Get ahead of it.
I lecture my kids once in a while, but general business, out of that, keep your ass clean. Do things that are good for the boss, not only for yourself. And that's all.
But if you had to,
I have no moral that I want to preach to anybody at this point. But I dislike anything, as you are interested in. Dislike anything that has to do with anti-anything. I've spent time with Muslims and enjoyed it in Austria, Germany, after the war.
Muslims or with Nazis?
Both.
Okay.
But I don't know if there was Nazis. Nazis are different than religions. And Nazis were just a bunch of crazy idiots, were loving idiots. But I sat down with in Germany and in Hitler's beer hall in Munich, and across the road, across the aisle from us, was a couple of young men who I introduced myself to at the time, and they happened to be Arabians of some kind. I didn't care where they came from, Iraq, Iran, or whatever, and Muslims. And we had a very pleasant evening together. And I know it could happen, but when is a worry that I will always
This great community radio station from